Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Classroom Matters with me, your host, Christy Houle. And today I am sitting down with Dr. Bryan Pearlman, who is a veteran teacher, school administrator, mental health therapist, professional development trainer, keynote speaker, adjunct professor. He has written two books. The first one, which was released in 2019, Whatever It Takes for All Students to Succeed in School and Life. And his most recent book, Maslow Before Bloom, Human Needs Before Academics, which we are going to dive into and talk quite a bit about today. So Dr. Pearlman, thank you so much for joining us and being a guest on the Classroom Matters podcast.
It's just such an honor. I appreciate it, Christy. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So you were someone that, as you put it, hated school. So walk us through how that shifted from being a child who maybe didn't do as well as they wanted to do in school, or maybe felt some disadvantages and hated school, to being in public education as an adult.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. Be surprised to know, many people might be surprised to know that there are many people like me who became teachers and administrators, and maybe going to school, the school part for themselves and their K-12 experience wasn't great. And in my case, it wasn't great at all. I think that the combination of being gifted in math and probably learning disabled in reading and writing, most certainly being ADHD before there was a name for it, that combination didn't mesh very well with kind of the school of the day, you know, going through school in the 70s, 80s, and then graduating in 1990s. Schools really weren't prepared for that. And I don't fault anybody along the way. I mean, I think people do the best that they know how to at any given point. So for me, it was like at some point, I promised myself that I'd be a teacher. I really wanted to be a teacher someday. And in my mind still, like maybe even be a principal, because I spent a lot of time with the principal, in the principal's office, as a student. You know, I went for my first job interview for an administration. They said, well, how many years experience? I'm like, about 13. They're like, we don't see it on your resume. I'm like, K through 12, I was in that office. I know how to talk down a teacher or a parent. I knew a lot about curriculum and putting a master's schedule together, because the principal oftentimes was my teacher of record. So I think having that experience and knowing that I really wanted to be different than that, I really wanted to be the kind of teacher that could help that kid, you know, the one that all of us struggle with, because I was that kid. And it wasn't like I was a bad kid. I don't think there's such thing as a bad kid. But if you go through your schooling day and they quadruple dip you in reading and writing, which is what they did, well-intended people did, that was just like half my day, realizing that, thinking to myself, I'm really not smart, or there's something wrong with me because everyone else seems to get it but me. So I think having that experience myself, having the empathy, having relationships, having that kind of experience, I think really helped me to be authentic with the kids, because it wasn't like, you know, sympathy or whatever, compassion only. It was like, no, I'm not saying I can appreciate how that is. Yes, I walked in those same shoes. So let's figure it out. Let's see if we can avoid some of the barriers and pitfalls that I faced, and let's just move forward. Let's do what we can do so that everyone can be successful. And I think that worked. It worked for me. I think it works for other people too.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your background in education. So you started out as a teacher. So kind of guide us through the work that you've done up to this point.
Okay, so I had done charity work for like 10 years right out of college. I had a teaching degree, 10 years out of college, just did charity work, nonprofit work, had a wake up in the middle of the night, epiphany, like, what am I doing? I'm a teacher. I was helping kids, but not in the conventional way. So I did become a teacher. I taught 5th grade, did that for, 4 years, I think. And then got my first administration job, which went from being like teacher of the year in a building to like 5 minutes later, like it was not the same response when you're the assistant principal. Nobody's coming to see you to just say hello and are you having a great day? And no one's coming for good reasons. So kind of baptism by fire, but I loved it. I loved being in the lunchroom. I loved being out on recess. I just loved even dealing with those kids. Again, the same kids. It was like, that's all I saw all day long. And I actually loved it. A lot of people don't. I went on, was a principal in 2 other districts. And then at that point, kind of was learning about a lot of the things that I saw in schools were a lot of things that my wife and her therapy practice were seeing. There was a lot of overlap. So the next chapter was to help expand her therapy practice. I went back to school to become, get a licensed therapy degree and get licensed in Missouri. And then also started taking the message I knew from my own experience as a student, as an educator, now in the mental health stuff, and started going out locally and now nationally talking about this, and also was encouraged to start writing some of the stories that I encountered and sharing those tales, because there was a lot of demand saying, wait a minute, I have that kid too, or I was that kid, or I'm the parent of that kid. And from that, it's just kind of taken off. And, you know, the point where I'm at right now, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm juggling a lot. Not a lot of time. I work 6 long days a week, and I wouldn't give up any of the things that I'm involved in, but I just love it. And it's a type of thing, whether I'm speaking to school social workers, school counselors, administrators, teachers, I feel like all of them feel that I walk in their shoes, and that it's a really positive message and one that they know. And it's also, aside from the storytelling, a lot of really concrete information for people that they could literally apply that afternoon with kids.
So your focus now is a lot on kids with challenging behaviors, trauma, mental health with students, and now I'm sure with teachers, and we'll dive into that as well. But do you think that that's something as an educator early on in your career? You know, we all sort of go through the motions of going to college and deciding what we want to be when we grow up. We get into a classroom, and then I think that we all sort of have our niche where we figure out what our focus, you know, some people go in and figure out their thing is science, and they want to delve into the science world and end up becoming a scientist later on in their life, or a mathematician, or whatever it may be. And now that you have this focus in mental health and working with these types of students and these types of issues, do you think that was always sort of an underlying passion that you had even early on as an educator, or is that something that you think grew based on the experiences that you had in those years as an educator?
I think both of what you said. Early in my career, I think that it was just that I was a relator and I have high empathy. When any of those tests, assessments, psychological things always said, you know, relator and empathy. So I think it was always innate. And in my own experience as a student, seeking out the kids that weren't really, like, the one size fits all really wasn't fitting them very well. Naturally, kids like that gravitated towards me, and I gravitated towards them, and it just worked out very well. I don't think that my awareness of trauma, of mental health, of any of those things really came into play until I was an administrator. And again, that's kind of when, like, my wife as a therapist, you know, and my world, those silos kind of became a Venn diagram. We started having really rich conversations of where those items overlapped. And I just couldn't get enough. I kept seeking out more information, more research, more examples of trauma, the impact of what does anxiety look like in the school, and depression, and what's the basis of self-harming behaviors and even suicidal ideation. I wanted more and more information because none of that was taught to either one of us in our teacher or principal prep classes. They just didn't do it. You know, for a lot of times, I remember being in a training I led in Alabama where a guy stood up, it's like 1,000 people in a room, and he goes, oh my gosh, can we stop talking about this mental health mumbo jumbo? Well, I don't even know what mumbo jumbo is, so I didn't really know. And I put up some statistics like half of adolescents meet the criteria for a mental health disorder. That's from like years ago, before the pandemic, before anything. And that half doesn't even include specifically the impact of trauma, because the guy's like, well, we're only talking about 1 or 2 kids in our school. I don't think so. Yeah. I think right now, between the adults and the kids, it's the exception to find someone that isn't negatively impacted by something in one of these areas. So again, I don't know what mumbo jumbo is, but this mental health stuff really has to be if not the number one thing, in the top three things that a school and a district are focused on, just for the wellness of everybody and just for helping them to be okay and in a good place. But also, since we're in the education and achievement business, we're not going to get to that if these other pieces aren't in place first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the gentleman in the meeting, because I want to, later on in the episode, I'm going to touch on the naysayers. And I know how some of this work that you're doing is perceived, and some pushback that you get from folks that have been in the education system for a while. So that's going to be an important piece of this. But I want to talk more about Maslow Before Bloom. And, I have the book. I've read it a few times. I love it. And I'll tell you what I love so much about this particular book, because I know it's your second book, is it's not a boring read. It's not you trying to teach people how to do things. It's full of case studies. It's full of real examples. As I was reading through these stories about Chuck and Curtis and MJ and all of these different kids, I'm like, I knew that kid. I knew that kid. I knew that kid. And so you can really relate to the experiences that you're talking about in this book. And you can also really use this book in a setting where it could be a book study. You have questions at the end of the case study. So it's really a working, fluid, living book. It's not a book that you just read and put back on the shelf. It's a book that you can truly use. So I want you to kind of dive in a little bit, and for our listeners that maybe aren't aware of the term or the Maslow Before Bloom concept, just maybe give a little bit of background of what exactly that means.
Sure. It's based on Abraham Maslow, a hierarchy of needs. The first part of that is that those basic foundational pieces, right? Like food, shelter, safety, security, all of those, like we really need to get those things in place first. And then like real achievement and success can happen when those foundational pieces are put in first. If a kid comes in and they're hungry or they're tired, they're scared, if we can help address those, even in a small way, the student will be more apt and more able to learn during the school day. We all know when something's going on in our personal life, it's often hard to concentrate on what we're doing, particularly if that really gets us in a very heightened state of fear or anger or, whatever, sadness. When we're at that state, it's very hard to communicate. It's very hard to critically think, reason, and problem solve. So the Maslow part is, let's address those pieces, and the other stuff will come with that. And then the Bloom is from Benjamin Bloom, Bloom's taxonomy. It's kind of like the steps as you're learning, the higher levels of learning and getting to those deeper points. Both are really, really important. We are in the education business. It's not Maslow only, and it's not Maslow, let's just do all of those and then never get to the academics. Right. I feel like sometimes people think that. Well, are you saying, a guy actually said to me, you'll get a kick out of this, sent me a note and said, so does that mean we're just going to sit in circle time until January, talking about all of the puppies and goldfish that died, and then maybe by January we can get into some reading and writing? And I kind of thought about that, and I kind of responded that that's not at all what I'm saying. Like, I would love for you to read the book, or I'd love to talk to you and explain that I feel like a lot of us, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. But again, someone walks in the morning and there's some policy, nobody eats after 9:18 in the morning. And I'm talking pre-pandemic. There may be reasons of where food has to be and so forth, but who came up with that policy? Give the kids something to eat. I'm a big dude. I've never missed a meal, not in a long time. And I know I don't concentrate if my stomach's rumbling or if I don't have enough nutrients in. If somebody was up because something bad was going on and they haven't slept at all, they're not going to learn anything today anyway. There's no reason they can't take a short nap or just relax some so they can come back and be ready to learn. If somebody's really scared or, something bad happened that morning, the 2 minutes it takes to just talk to the student, help reassure them. I know it's hard now, but give them a hug, whatever they need, they're going to be okay. And it's not just, let's do this so our test scores are good. Let's do this because all those foundational pieces will help kids as they grow and learn, building that trust, building that connection, knowing that someone cares and loves about them. There's like nothing more important in my mind than that. Unfortunately, for a lot of us in the field, none of this stuff was taught to us, right? We've either picked it up along the way or I'm not even sure how we've done that. So a lot of the work I do is going out to those in the field, but I also rewrote a course and teach 2 courses and hope that we're spreading that message to other universities and putting more of the trauma and the mental health, more of the Maslow in, because most of the textbooks for these courses, they just don't have them. They're really focused, like they have trauma in the book, but they're talking about like head trauma. And head trauma is really important too, but it's not at that huge magnitude where like 2/3 of us have at least an ACE score, an adverse child experience score of 1 or higher, right? And maybe 1 in 8 of us have 4 or higher. So if we're not addressing these things, if we're not learning about this, if we're not incorporating these things that fall in this domain on the social emotional piece, I think we're doing a real disservice to the process and a real disservice to the kids.
Yeah, and I want to read something that really stuck out to me in, I believe it was probably the first 20 to 30 pages of the book. So I'm going to have to look down at my notes, but you say in the book, if a student is hungry, tired, or scared, give them food, a nap, or a hug. This does not require board approval or a bond issue. It seems so simple. It is simple. It is also very effective. Why is it so hard for teachers to get this? Because it is simple. And why do we as adults forget that children are really just little human beings with the same needs and wants that we have as an adult? If I'm hungry, I'm hungry. If I'm tired, I'm tired. I'm not going to learn from you. It doesn't matter if I'm 9 or 29. Why is that so hard for teachers to understand these concepts?
And I know where you're coming from. I wouldn't say teachers or all teachers. I know that's not what you meant.
Yeah.
I think there's a small subset of teachers that, are, and maybe part of it is the pressure of the test, the high stakes test.
Yeah.
Maybe they just have never experienced this in their own life. Maybe, their content is such an important piece that we lose sight of exactly what you said, that these are little people, right? I think people forget that. I think that it wasn't that many years ago that we didn't talk about any of this stuff. So one of the things in my life is I always assume goodwill until proven otherwise. And I really do believe people do the best that they know how to at a certain time. So there just are people that they just don't get it. I'm going to give an example. I had this belief as a teacher and as a principal that if I didn't like what I had, or if there was an issue, I wasn't going to sit and complain about it. I was going to do everything in my power to make a positive impact. That could be as simple as we started a morning mixed martial arts group. That's like the other guy who ran it with me, and then another person were former UFC fighters. Like you think about elementary principal, elementary kids with the UFC fighter. Like what's that all about? Are we having like underground kid fights or something? And it wasn't that at all. I just had literally like 25 kids out of my whole building that made up 90-something% of the referrals. Their attendance was bad. Their attitude was bad. Their achievement was bad. Everything was, and it wasn't even them. We were failing them, right? We weren't making the connection with them and getting to know the kids and where they came from. So I could sit and continue suspending kids and consequencing them and having the kid, socially promote them as they're not achieving, or I had to come up with another plan. And so we did, and it wasn't kid fighting. I was a boxer growing up. I taught stand-up boxing. We never hit anyone. It was hitting the air, shadow boxing and so forth. And then the other gentleman, then we had another instructor, taught Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is the ground game and submissions. So much of it was building a team, building a family, holding everyone accountable together. Within like 4 to 6 weeks, 24 of the 25 kids, no behavior concerns, attendance improved, achievement improved. It was incredible. I mean, I wish I could say I planned for it to be. I figured if we impacted 5 or 6 kids, it lightened the load a bit and we'd see what to do with the other kids. And so I had 100 schools came to visit and see what the secret sauce was. Christy, there's no secret sauce, right? Yeah. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's the why, the purpose behind it. And it was building those connections, and it was helping kids, and it was providing that connection that so many of them really needed. It doesn't have to be that. I started a boys knitting group. We had a running club. None of this is rocket science. I got recognized for things and I get awards and stuff. I'm not motivated by that. And I really do say what I'm talking about really isn't that hard. It isn't that hard, but it is having that laser focus on what we believe in, on helping kids, coming up with the plan and implementing that with fidelity and doing the best we can and understanding a really bad intervention could work 2 or 3 times, and a really great intervention may not work the first or second time. So really getting back to the point on the teachers, for a lot of teachers, they never thought this way. They've never understood that. That's not in the game plan.
Yeah.
And it really is looking for building that capacity, helping teachers, coaching them up. When I sought out teachers, I wanted people with the high empathy, with the relationship, and that growth mindset. I figured I could help them learn anything else in the job. Those are 3 really hard things to teach someone if they're not innate or it's not how they're wired. So I think that's probably where some of the rub is. And a lot of us grew up with the carrot and stick approach. We'll dangle a carrot, you'll comply, or we'll hit you with a stick and you'll comply. I'm not sure how effective that approach is. In fact, I don't think it's effective at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I agree with your assessment for sure. And I would love to know, what do you say to those that, going back to the, if a kid comes in at 9 o'clock and is hungry and breakfast is supposed to be over and done with, and you have that one child that comes in and they're hungry, and you have the individual that will say, well, if I bend the rules for him, then all the other kids will think it's okay. I know you've heard that before, Bryan. Well, if he gets to eat at 9:20, then I got to let everybody else that wants to come in eat at 9:20. Or if I don't, suspend that child for his behavior, then that means my other kids are going to see the way he's acting and getting away with it, and then they're all going to act that way. So what do you say to folks that have that argument? Because I know you've heard it and I've heard it.
I hear it all the time. I hear it on the road now. There's always a handful that stay behind for good reasons and want to talk. And there's always the one that I can pick them out. I don't care if there's 1,000 people in the room. Yes. I can see the person with the face and with the arms crossed, and I know it's coming. And I'm really okay with that. There literally is no research in psychiatry, psychology, education. There is no research to support that idea that if we allow one, everyone else is. And I get it often more than that. I remember a teacher saying to me, I can't believe, name the kid, got sent to your office, and he's supposed to be an ISS. And when I'm walking my kids to art class, I saw you and that kid running on the track together.
Yes.
What message are we sending? And I said, you know what? Prisoners even get time out on the yard. Okay. So I don't know where that argument comes from. The way I look at it is we give kids what they need when they need it. Today I posted something someone else had written, fair isn't always equal, and it isn't. I've had people all the time, well, what message are we sending? What are this? We're sending that we are not punitive. We're teaching, a better way. We're using the restorative piece of, great, we're on the same page now. I trust you, you trust me, we have a plan. Now, how are you going to fix the damage that's been done over there? Okay. I can tell you from my personal experience, I have to have the record for an elementary administrator in St. Louis County for most suspended days by an administrator. If I'm not, I'm pretty darn close. Because early in my career, that's all I did was just send kids home. And it was the definition of insanity, thinking that they were going to come back better, because literally no one's come back better from a suspension, right? So we look at what's effective, what's most likely to produce a positive outcome. That's what we need to be doing. So in a lot of schools, it's building the momentum with others who are really successful with this, showing the data, showing the research, helping, even hand-holding folks to see that. I had someone very skeptical. I did an in-person one maybe 2 months ago. I'm not doing a lot of in-person because of the situation we're in right now. And somebody was really skeptical. And I said, what harm is there? Do you like what you have now? No. So try it. If it doesn't work, I'll eat crow. It's fine. So I was there for like a 2 or 3 day thing, working with groups of teachers. And the third day, middle of the thing, the teacher flung the door open and goes, it worked. It worked. Nothing worked with Paul. It worked. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Great. Yeah. And you could hear at the top of the mountain, it worked. This idea works. And so sometimes success brings future success. that book from years ago, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
It's great for administrators, even teachers, anybody to really understand that you have the really fast adopters and you have the ones that'll just outweight this whole thing, right? I had a teacher who did, not often, was always one or two in my building. No matter what I said or did, because my name had principal in it, they were not going to be on my team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really fine. I remember one of them, and finally I said, you know what? I'm not planning to go anywhere. And you seem to be really upset. I don't plan on changing. I know this formula works. I know it's going to help our kids. I'd like to compromise. I'd like to find a win-win, meet in the middle. But if you're in, I'm just not going anywhere. So these are like 3 non-negotiables. Never had many. I was agreeable to anything, but these are to the core of my existence, and I'm not going to budge on them. And I really don't want you to be unhappy. So if there's another situation somewhere else that will make you happy, that maybe handles things differently, you tell me where. I'll write a letter for you. I'll help. I'll do anything I can to help you. And occasionally they left. And then I was able to bring someone else in who was part of the high empathy, relationship, and also that growth mindset. And the net result for our kids usually was a better situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talk a lot in the book too about, you brought up restorative, and so there are a lot of these case studies in the Maslow Before Bloom book. You are really using a restorative. You may not say the word restorative, or you may not list those things, but you really are using a restorative approach, and so I think that that's vital too for administrators. So really quickly, Dr. Pearlman, before our time is up, how can we implement these during a pandemic?
That's a really great question. I think from all the work that I've done, in all of these areas, the best thing that we can be doing right now, truly, amongst all of the ideas and things, first of all, we've got to make sure that our staff and our colleagues are okay, and that our kids are okay. Academics are so important, but now, if ever, those Maslow things have to be there first. A lot of the trainings I'm doing now, primarily virtually, is on self-care. And I know self-care is this great buzzword, and there's a million books with the title, and look it up on Google. It's probably 8 million things, if not more.
Yeah.
What I mean more is that we're looking at ways to identify in ourselves and others when we are out of our window of tolerance, when we are experiencing that big emotion, and practicing even before that ways to bring ourselves into a more calm state, ways to get whatever that is that's on our mind, those stressors, etc., out, find a good outlet for it, find a way to get ourselves to be at a better place. If we do that, right, and have these rich conversations and be there for each other, we're all going to be at a better place. And academically, we're going to be at a better place. I've heard from people, well, it's a throwaway year. It's a throwaway this, and we're wasting. You know what? Nobody chose to have a once in 100-year pandemic, of this magnitude. Nobody chose for that. So if nothing more, if all the kids in a year, at least a year, solid calendar year, got from this is to understand self-care, and staff to understand the importance of this mental health and helping those of us that are struggling with that and with trauma, if that's all they get, they're going to be fine. We can catch them up on some of the content, but it's really hard to catch people up on some of these pieces. What are we going to remember 5, 10, 20 years from now? I'm not minimizing the fact that a lot of people have gotten sick. A lot of people have died. I'm not minimizing that at all. But if we dig deeper into the silver lining of this and seeing the connections that we've established, seeing just the magnitude of everything that we've done to really turn on a dime to be there for each other and for our students and our families and the community, those are the things that I'm going to remember. I'm not going to remember that we had to double dip the next year on fractions because we didn't quite get it, or because we're doing this hybrid or virtual thing and we don't have as much time as we did. I really think we're going to be okay. And I really think we're going to be okay because it's not just people in St. Louis or in Missouri or even the United States. It's a worldwide thing. So the silver lining for me is that we're having these conversations on mental health, on self-care, on trauma, And it, in some regards, in some corners of our country, it took this to get us to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, what you're doing is so needed. It's so vital. So the 2 books, Whatever It Takes for All Students to Succeed in School and Life, and Maslow Before Bloom. To all my listeners, if you have not had a chance to check it out, I promise you, you will not be disappointed. I just read Maslow Before Bloom for like the 2nd time. I love it. It's great. It's good information, and it really helps you reflect inside internally, I think, as well, to some of your own personal behaviors. And honestly, I think a lot of the skills help you in just your life, not just when dealing with children, but just life. Where can our listeners get in touch with you, Dr. Pearlman, if they want to reach out?
So a couple ways. Twitter's a great place to meet up. Dr. P_principal, so DRP_principal. They can reach me by email at Bryan with the Y at mostvaluablepd.com. They can reach me on our Facebook group. We actually have a Maslow Before Bloom Facebook group. They can text me. I mean, I'm happy to give my number out. They can totally text me. I get them every day. 314-323-7340. Again, 314-323-7340. We've all been to conferences. We've all met people say, reach out to me. And you know really quickly, they really don't want you to. That's not who I am. I mean, we really are on a mission. We're very focused on what we're trying to do. If there's anything that we can do to help anyone who has any impact on educators, kids, the community, we're happy to help any way that we can.
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Bryan Pearlman. And I know we have not heard from the last of you yet. And for all of our listeners, we will put all of Dr. Pearlman's information in the links below the podcast description, as we always do. So thank you again. And this is Christy Houle signing out for this episode of Classroom Matters.